Oh, there we go. Whenever I'm on a different device, I'm like, where's the button? I gotta find the button, and it's a lot of pressure. Anywho, all right, so awesome. Let's kick it off. So, where we're picking up today is we are in the doctor's opinion. Oh man, this is, I think, the second week in a row where I was going to say what page we're on before I did the announcement, so everyone had time to find the page. And then I forgot to do that. So we're on page triple X, doctor's opinion, page triple X, XXX. And if you're trying to find that page in your book, I think the easiest way is to find page one, because that's got a number, page one, and you just go to page one, and then you go back a page, and we're on the left hand side. So fingers crossed, knock on wood, triple X, which is also a fun page to start on. If you guys remember, and I think it was the early 2000s, there was that like movie with Vin Diesel. Yeah, triple X, we're going to be diving in and jumping out of an airplane with a snowboard. I don't know why, but woo! I don't think I saw that movie. But that's what we're going to be doing at this big book study. Woo! And none of the Canadians are here, so they won't be mad that I mentioned snow. Because October, don't mention that word. Anywho, so page triple X. And where we are is on the second full paragraph, where it says the classification of alcoholics. So we're talking about classifying alcoholics. That's where we're picking up. And so it says the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and of course is in much detail outside of the scope of this book. So what is Dr. Silkworth? Dr. Silkworth is the gentleman who gave us the second statement in the doctor's opinion. And what is he saying about in this paragraph or in this sentence? Because I mean, like, it didn't make sense to me. What he's saying is it is difficult to classify alcoholics. Anyone feel a little difficult to classify? Fair enough. And he's saying, trying to put us silly little drunks in boxes, or drug addicts, or overeaters, or gamblers, or codependents, or Al-Anons, whatever brings you to this all inclusive study. It's hard to, yeah, we are on page triple X, XXX, right in the doctor's opinion. So what we're talking about, you're very welcome. What we're talking about is, it is difficult to classify alcoholics. And then when it says, and in much detail is outside of the scope of this book, that's not really what this book is for. The purpose of this book isn't really to classify these types of alcoholics. So I love that he's like, yeah, it's a bit much for us to classify. We don't need to. And then he's like, but I'm going to do it anyway. So now what we're going to dive into is 5 different types of alcoholics. Now I'm going to really break down these 5 different types, because the more that I can kind of see myself in them, the more I can identify. But also, I'm going to say something controversial, a little hot topic, stirring up the pot at the very start of the big book study. What I will say is these 5 types, these 5 classifications are not as useful as the 4 classifications into wives. What? Oh, controversy. Oh, just stirring the pot early in the big book study. And what we're going to do, we're going to break down these 5 different types. And then we're going to explain why these 5 types don't matter, because that's how Dr. Silkworth does. So, kicking off with Dr. Silky. All right. So this is type 1. Type 1 right here. There are. So if you're writing in your book, and I hear it's what all the cool kids do, type 1, put a little 1. 1, there are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. And some of you are like, I don't relate to that at all. Listen, I just got here, Paige. It's rude that you called me a psychopath. Welcome. We are going to have a look at what that word means, and we're going to break down that word and have a new experience with it. So there are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. Okay, emotionally unstable doesn't often fit our traditional definition of psychopath, but let's see. We are all familiar with this type, and some of you are like, what? How many psychopaths do I know? Are they around me? Those of us who use stimulants, we're like, they're in the roof. You guys know what I'm saying. Those of us who didn't use stimulants are like, who let Paige do a big book study? The problem is who nobody stopped me. I think that's the greater issue. Alrighty. So there are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. So laying aside the definition of psychopath. So we're going to just put that aside. We're going to come back to it. Has anyone here ever gone on the wagon for keeps? Anyone here ever, I'm going to quit. I want to quit. I never want to do it again, right? Has anyone here ever come to filled with guilt and shame and remorse the morning after, but been unable to follow up our guilt, our shame, and our remorse with any consistent action? I'm going to quit tomorrow. I'm going to quit tomorrow. I'm going to quit by New Year's. I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit before Canadian Thanksgiving. I'm going to, or Indigenous Peoples Day, or I can't remember all the holidays that are today. But I'm going to quit before today. It's happened. Oh no, it's too late. But have we ever like quit and quit and quit, but never been able to follow our quitting up with action? Does that sound familiar? Now, it would be rude if I then say, psychopath. So what are we talking about? Because when we hear psychopath, what do we think? Some of you are probably thinking like a true crime documentary. And some of you are falling asleep to like those true crime podcasts and are like wondering, why can't I sleep? Like I'm falling asleep to Midsummer Murders. It's great, like, and then he got a knife. And we're like, and there's no judgment, but just if you're finding yourself a little anxious, I'm not going to say it's that. But when we listen to the true crime podcast, that's what we think with psychopath, like a serial killer, a remorseless person. And so it's like, man, yeah, listen to those. Yeah. It's like, that doesn't seem congruent with somebody who is filled with guilt and shame and remorse and is going to quit tomorrow and is never going to do it again, but can't seem to build momentum. So I did not pack my dictionaries with me on this trip, which is shocking because I do enjoy my old-timey dictionaries. But I did make sure I grabbed the definitions from my 1930s dictionary. So I got that 1930s medical dictionary from 1934, and I got the 1930s dictionary from 1935, just Webster's dictionary. It is not the official one. It's not the one that everyone uses. I just have a dictionary from the 1930s because I'm fun at parties. Whee! So when I looked up psychopathy in my dictionaries, and psychopathy was mental disease. So the word psychopath in the 1930s was more attuned or more kind of pointing to somebody that had a mental illness. And then I looked up psychopath because it's like, oh, I gotta find out if I'm one of those. I'm really not. I don't even kill mosquitoes, guys. Like I was asked to do this whole like talk on the 4 absolutes, and I told the story about how I saved an ant from a toilet, which that was my funniest talk. Just because they had all these really smart, really fancy people, and then they had me, and I'm like, they got letters after their name, they write books, and I'm like, I got an ant from the toilet. So I'm not a psychopath. I'm not murdering nothing. So, but let's find out what does it mean to be a psychopath in the 1930s? It says a person affected by psychoneurosis. Why, yes, that clears it right up. I was taking some Tums for my psychoneurosis earlier. I so know what that means, And so what is psychoneurosis? So I got to keep going. This is why the dictionary is fun to me, because I got to go on these little rabbit holes down down dictionary corner, off we go. And so what is psychoneurosis? So a psychopath is somebody who's affected by psychoneurosis. What is psychoneurosis? It is a functional disorder of the mind and nerves. So again, when we talk about psychopath in the 1930s, we're just talking about somebody who in 2024 we might say is struggling with mental health, mental illness. That's more the language we use. So and by the way, if you're like, oh goodness gracious, I now relate to that, don't go around and tell all your friends I'm a psychopath, because the translation has not carried over, and you just might not carry. Although again, if you are trying to avoid the family for whatever holiday it is in the world, You can do that and then come hang out at the big book study. You do you, but we might have to make amends. So just keep that in mind. Alrighty. So that is type one. And some of you are like, "Ooh, I relate to more type one than I thought I did," right? Now, this is type two. Type two, there's a type of man who is unwilling to admit he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. Have I ever been type two? Have I been somebody that was unwilling to give up the booze, give up the drugs, give up the addictive behavior? Did I switch around? Did I switch from scotch to brandy? Those are a little fancy for my taste, but I switched from cheap from Axe Head. These are Canadian brands like Axe Head to Pilsner, and like, oh, just what's that ice one? That black ice. Oh. So I would switch those around, and that's Canadian. So the cheap drinks. I am a I am a bottom shelf sort of gal. Some of you guys know. I'm not doing the top shelf shenanigans. Bottom shelf it is. Pinkies up though, like a lady. So like, have I switched around the types that I'm drinking? Right? Have I done that? Have I switched my drinking with drugs? Have I switched my substances? Have I switched around whatever brings you to the study addictive behavior? If I'm a codependent, have I switched around him or her or them? You know what I mean? Have I switched around the love of my affections? You know what I mean? Have I switched that around? Has that been my experience? And if I'd done whatever I could to try to stay connected, right, to that thing that is giving me relief? Have I been unwilling to let go of the booze or the drugs or whatever brings you to this study? Has that been my experience? Some of us might be relating to type two. You know what I'm saying? We might be feeling type two. Yeah, I was unwilling to admit that I could not take a drink. Page triple X if you just joined us. Then it goes on to say, type three. There is the type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. Has anyone here ever had a period of sobriety? 3 days, 3 months, 3 years, right? And said, you know what? Once I get a year sober, it'll be different this time. Or I didn't touch it for 6 months, it'll be different this time. Has that been my experience? You know what I'm saying? And so what we're seeing, some of us are like, oh, goodness gracious, I didn't think I related to any of this, but I seem to be a bit type one. I seem to be a bit type two, and we got some type three rocking and rolling. And then let's have a look at type four. Type four, it says there is the manic depressive. So if you're writing in your book, I hear it's what all the cool kids do. You can make a little note, type four. I'll use childhood peer pressure to get things done. You should see me when I try to help sponsees with amends. I'm like, I will get you a little patch. I'll buy you a present. Go make your amends. Just childhood motivation. So there is the manic depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. And so again, we read manic depressive and we might not think we relate to this. Now, manic depressive, as we read it, just like kind of looking at it, it looks like the old antiquated word for bipolar disorder. Now, I have a friend, and we were best friends for years. And my friend would come to the big book study, and I would be presenting the big book. And my friend is schizoaffective, which is schizophrenia and bipolar. Which they'll joke about, like, it's a fun combination. But they relate to that manic depressive as like clinical bipolar, and they're like, oh, I wish they had written a whole chapter on the manic depressive type. To which I, like a good, not great best friend, was like, girl, you got a whole book. You got a whole book for you, I'll miss that, but I want my little special chapter. So what good's a friend if you can't tease a little? So manic depressive. Now, for a while there too, when I was working with sponsees that didn't have bipolar, like weren't clinically diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I would talk about that manic depressive in the sense of like, is it possible that I have emotions that just go all over the place, where I swing from emotion to emotion, like all over? So I don't feel emotionally settled. And it's like, okay, we can relate to that. But then I found that 1930s dictionary and that 1930s medical dictionary. So I looked it up. And so I couldn't find manic depressive. So I found some definitions for mania. So mania, which is violent insanity, intense excitement, excessive or unreasonable desire. Now, if we point my mania in the direction of a substance like alcohol or drugs, or you know what I mean? Ooh, does that kind of relate? I've got this excessive desire. I've got this intense excitement for this, for this thing. But then I had to look at that. So that's my regular sort of dictionary. Then I had to look at my medical dictionary because again, fun at parties. Just gonna bring out the 1934 pocket medical dictionary, and it said violent insanity with wild excitement. So some of that could, elevated states of mania. But then it said mania alcoholic. And I'm like, ooh, that sounds interesting. And it said insanity from misuse of alcohol. So drinking my way into cognitive impairment, drinking my way into mental health challenges, drinking my way into brain damage. You know what I'm saying? Like, can I relate to that? And then they had mania a potu. And I'm pretty sure it even had an umlaut. So mania and then A and then POTU. And I was like, oh, I'm here for that. I don't know how to pronounce it because I don't know how the umlaut works. It is delirium tremens. And so it's possible when we talk about manic depressive, we're talking about people that have physical or mental effects from alcohol. Does that relate? Can I kind of relate to that? And listen, I'm just trying to help people relate. So if you're like, I related to the first part, oh, we're on page triple X. And I did already make the Vin Diesel joke for anyone that's missed it. Yeah. Uh, so so that is type 4. And then we get into type 5. Now, I'll be frank with you. Type 5, never been her, never met her, can't relate. Never in my life been a type 5. Cannot, absolutely not. So this is type 5. I'm sure you guys relate. You're lovely. I don't relate. So type 5. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect. Never been her, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. Can't relate. And so I think that's going to hit all of us. Like, I think if you're here, you can relate to one or almost all of them. I've never been a type 5. But I will point out, I think the type 5, this is my opinion, and maybe it's because I'm so far removed from type 5 that it's like, I can't even fathom what it would be like to be type 5. But that idea that, like, I wonder if type 5 is meeting us where we're at. One of the things that I've noticed in the book Alcoholics Anonymous is that this book meets me where I'm at. It meets me in my unwillingness, it meets me in my denial, it meets me in my resistance, and it then takes me where I need to go. So I can almost imagine us reading this book. No, I've never been a psychopath. I'm not over remorseful. I follow up on my resolutions, and then reading type 2, no, that's not me. I don't relate to that. And type 3, no, I'm nothing like that. And type 4, no. And then type 5, okay. Is it possible you're entirely normal? You are able, you're intelligent, you are friendly, except for the effect that alcohol has upon you. Oh, we got you, meeting me where we're at and taking me where we need to go. And that might not be what it is. Maybe there are able, intelligent. Actually, I will say in general, like most people who have alcoholism, yes, we are selfish. Yes, we are self centered, but we are great. I'm biased. So if you're at this big book study, I love you. I think you're the best. You guys validated me at the beginning. I'm going to validate you. Here we are, pumping tires, rock and roll. But I wonder, yeah, Eileen, I wanted to be type 5. Yeah, that was my goal. I was striving to type 5. Oh, I'm just such a well-rounded, wonderful alcoholic in me behind the dumpster. We'll talk about that. Alrighty. So it then goes on to say, bottom of triple X. And this paragraph is why all these types don't matter. Why it doesn't matter what type I am. What doesn't matter if I'm type 2. Doesn't type 6. You beat me to it. They got the chat is on fire, and I wish I was on a different device because I would be keeping up with it a little bit better. But it's hard to do on my tablet. But chat's where it's at. That's where all the cool kids hang out. That's where Rob is, so we know because he's a cool kid. Uh, so what we're now getting into is the next paragraph where it's explaining why not these types don't matter. And it says all these and many others. But wait, there's more. I'm thinking like an OxyClean commercial or ShamWow. But wait, there's more. I just imagine like Dr. Silkworth trying to do it like that. Like for only 9 payments of $99.99. I don't know why 90s infomercials are in my brain. Okay. But all these and many others have one symptom in common. So this is one symptom that each and every single alcoholic has, each and every single addict has, each and every single compulsive, whatever brings you to the study has. And it is the physical allergy. So you can make a note, write down physical allergy. Oh yeah, Rob's got to be our adult today, unless you wanted to take over adulting responsibilities, Howard. But I feel like you don't today. I feel like you're here to shenan. So Rob is our adult. We got to have one, and we all know it's not me. All right. So this is a symptom that each and every single alcoholic has. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving, and that is our physical allergy. And it's important to understand, and we read last week, that this physical allergy doesn't happen to non-alcoholics. It never happens in the average drinker. This is something that only happens to alcoholics. And what does that look like? What does this phenomenon of craving looks like? It looks like I take a drink. And I'll share with you my experience with it. I take a drink, and the first thing that happens is, you know what I mean? Oh, that's what I'm after. I get that, that relief, that release. And I listen, well, again, whatever brings you to this study, I had somebody that was asking me a little about like, what does that allergy kind of look like in different manifestations? Well, if I'm a gambler, I place that bet and I get that, or if I'm a codependent, I get that text message, I get that phone call, and I get, or listen, if I'm a crackhead, I smoke that crack, I get that. We were maybe more going for codependency and like food, or I eat that food that I can't eat, that I have that abnormal reaction to, and I need more, right? That I start and I need more. And this phenomenon of craving, is that thing inside of me. I get that relief, I get that ease, I get that comfort, and it sets off, I need more. And it just looks like just one more, doesn't it? You're out in the bar and it's like, I'll just have one more. Or and then it starts looking like, well, I might as well do shots. You know what I mean? How I describe it for myself is I take a drink, and that drink demands a second, and that second insists on 4, and that 4th drink will not relent until I've had 8, and the 8th drink is screaming at me until I've had 16, and so on and so forth. See, I start drinking and I get thirstier. I start drinking and I need more. And the more that I drink, the louder that more gets. And that is that phenomenon of craving. Now, if you're like me and you're coming to this study and you're like, I'm not like Paige, I'm type 5 all the way, I am entirely normal, I don't relate, your tooth is weird. That's hurtful. But if you're like me, I'm looking for all the ways I don't relate. I'm looking for all the ways I'm different than you. I'm looking for how I'm not as bad as you. Well, here's my experience. That it did not set off every single time, especially early in our drinking careers or in our using careers. And I always like to joke, only an alcoholic's going to make a career out of it. And it wasn't no 9 to 5. I was burning the company oil is what I was doing. Oh, had no trouble getting me working that alcoholic overtime. You know what I'm saying? Ooh, I'm gone for 3 days. Where'd my shoes go? I don't know. Right? But what happens is we talk about the physical allergy, and if your brain's like mine, you're thinking about that time back in 04 or that time in 86 Or that time in, 2011, where you drank like a lady or a gentleman or a fancy pants person. You know what I mean? You had 3 drinks and you went home with dry pants and the person you're supposed to be with. Like and it's important to remember what I am remembering is the exception, not the rule. Because if you were asked now, where I'm saying we got some non-alcoholic folks, we got some normies. And if I were to ask them, hey, could you please tell me a time where you went out drinking and you did not wet your pants? Can you tell me about a time when you went drinking and you did not burn your life to the ground? Can you tell me about a time that you went drinking and you know what I mean? You didn't burn the car and get a DUI or your 6th DUI. You know what I mean? They don't relate. They don't relate. Actually, I remember, I'm telling this story. I remember this was a couple of years ago. I was out visiting family, and they were drinking, and they had this like it was like this alcohol that had peaches at the bottom of it. And do you know what they were doing? They were fighting about the peaches at the bottom, these liquor soaked peaches, but they weren't fighting how you and I would be fighting over it. They were like, no, you have, no, I'm a little tipsy. You take it. No, you take, no, I couldn't possibly. I'm like, y'all just get the peaches, get it in you. I can't relate. They don't seem to do how I do. You know what I mean? So that is their experience every single time. I'm carpet surfing. I'm like, I am after whatever I could get. It's in me. I need more. I can't relate to these folks. So that is my experience. And if my experience is I've started to drink and I've overshot the mark, that I've started to use drugs and I've used more than I intended. And I know what it's like to burn my life, burn those consequences, do those things I never wanted to do. If that has been my experience, man, I probably have this physical allergy. And I also have this way of explaining it too. When we get to page 21, it talks about the real alcoholic. And on page 21, it says he might start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. So there might be times early in my drinking, early in my using, where I didn't have this thing, but I drank or used my way into this thing. But here's what it can look like for a lot of people. It's a little like Russian roulette, playing Russian roulette with a revolver. Now, the bullet in the chamber is the physical allergy, that thing that sets off inside of me. Once I take that drink, once I take that drug, that place that bet, text that whoever, that thing inside me that sets off, that tells me more. And early in my drinking and using career, there's maybe one bullet in the chamber. But the more that I play that game, the more a nefarious force seems to put more and more and more bullets in the chamber. By the time I get here on a Monday night, having listened to me natter on, the odds are pretty good that you don't got any blanks, that it is all bullets. You know what I'm saying? And if that is my experience, that's what we're talking about. Then it says this phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. So physiologically, on a physical level, those of us who have this allergy, we process alcohol, relationships, drugs differently than non-alcoholics. Now, I got my 1930s definition of allergy, which an allergy is a natural hypersensitivity to an artificially induced substance. So something that is artificially induced. I take it and it sets off something that I am sensitive to. Now, when we talk about that sensitive, some of you are like, oh, are you talking about me? I'd never be sensitive. See what I made a joke about sensitive. But what we're talking about is how I respond seems to be in a way that other people don't. That's what we're talking about. So, and it sets me apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. We do not have any way to get rid of the allergy. If I have the allergy, I have the allergy. I don't have a way to get rid of it. And it says the only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. If I have the allergy, I have the allergy. I can't drink. I can't use. I can't engage in whatever behavior brings you to the study. I can't do it. If I have it, I have it. It does not go away. And I want to point something out. This letter was probably 1938 that it was written, but like book, you know, published in 1939. Uh, I love that you're like allergy. Just it's so funny with the what I can catch in the chat. It looks like we're yelling allergy, yeah, you know, a little dramatic. We tend to be. We but what are we talking about? So that idea that like in the 1930s, all they had to suggest for an alcoholic was do not drink. What an addict do not use. For gambler, do not gamble, right? That is the only thing they have to suggest. Now, I'll point some out. It's 2024. Later on in this book, we're going to talk about, hey, maybe one day we could put man on the moon. Well, they done that. Like they had a rover on Mars too. I think two rovers on Mars that were up there so long they died. And then I felt sad for the robots because that's again not a psychopath. A little too far the other way, probably. Poor little Mars robot. You know, but we still don't have an answer for the allergy, and it's important to understand if I'm coming to 12 step, I don't got an answer for the allergy. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. What that means is I cannot take a drink. I can't take so much as one sip, one drink. I can't take a drug. I have to be done. Yeah. Space modulator, pew pew. I need to be done. I cannot drink. I cannot ever safely do it again. Now, if you're hanging with me on a Monday night, you were probably a little bit attuned to the idea that that's not something we could do. I like to say, if you had the choice, you're probably not hanging with me. I'm glad you're here. You're the coolest, but you're probably out there living your life. You know what I mean? And so, and actually, I'll talk a little bit about it. I've got some allergies. Now, to be fair, they might be more intolerances, but I have ceased fighting anything or anyone. Love and tolerance of others is my code. I seem to be allergic to onions and I seem to be allergic to peppers. And what my solution is for my onion allergy and my pepper allergy, and to be honest with you guys, probably garlic, but I'm not willing to concede that to my innermost self. I'm in a bit of denial with it. It's fine. It's fine. But most of you can have onions. Most of you can have peppers. Most of you just live your life, and that's great. But for me, I can't have those things. And that makes me abnormal. Not my general weirdness, but it's just most of you can. And I'm of the smaller percentage of people on earth who can't. Howard's got the date in the chat. I don't have the ability to pull up the whole thing that you posted, but Howard's got the info. He's got it. What was I say? Oh, my onion and pepper allergy. It just makes me abnormal. There's a reaction that happens to me that does not happen to other people. Now, my solution for my onion and pepper allergy is pretty good. Here's what I do. I do not have onions and peppers. I just say no to those things. I just, I was at 8:39 p.m. that this statement was produced. I'm assuming that's what that said. I actually have no idea what's happening in the chat. But actually, I'm going to make up a whole story what Howard put in the chat. I'm here for that. So Howard has the exact date and time this statement was written. He can tell you what Dr. Silkworth was wearing, the whole deal. All right, so focus, my allergy. So I just do not eat onions and peppers. That is a solution. Now I am a little hard on myself, so I do sometimes gaslight me, and I'm like, maybe I'm just being a big baby, but I do not eat onions and peppers, and that is a sufficient solution. Now, if you're hanging out with me on a Monday night, I have a feeling you have said, that's it, I'm never going to drink again. You've said, that's it, I'm never going to use again. You've said, that's it, I'm never going to talk to that person again. I'm never going to place a bet again. That's it, I am done. And it not work. And that is the crux of my problem. See, in this moment, they put some onions in the stuffing. I will not eat that. I'm just not going to have it. I'm not going to be like, oh girl, this time will be different. You're in Northern Alberta, not Southern Alberta. I'm just not going to eat it, But that is my real problem as an alcoholic, that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt the consequences that will come if I take that drink, I take that drug, in my very literal case as well, the onions and peppers. I know what will happen. But for an alcoholic, for an addict, for a compulsive, whatever brings you to this study, I cannot stop myself from taking that first drink or drug. That is my real problem. I know I have to stay sober. I know I need to stay sober. And yet I can't stay so I can't just not take the first drink. And so the only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence, which is impossible for an alcoholic. Do you know what I'm saying? It is impossible. I am not able to do that on my own power. I can do it for a little bit, but I'm not fun to be around. You know what I'm saying? It is not a solution. And that's, by the way, that is mind boggling. You know, come to Alcoholics Anonymous and the solution is not sobriety, right? Sobriety is not a solution, because sobriety throws me into the second part of my problem, which is the mental obsession that I'm going to drink again. So I'm in some trouble. And then it goes on, very bottom of page XXX, it goes on to say, this immediately precipitates us, the us as doctors, the medical fraternity, into a seething cauldron of debate. Yeah, it's a kettle, a vat, or a large container. But I mean, we're coming up to Halloween, so you can imagine that it's a bunch of like doctors dressed up as witches that are like got their brew and they're boil, trial and trouble. The drunks don't do what we tell them. I wish I had something to rhyme with that, but I don't. So the doctors, they're around their witches cauldron, they're throwing in their potions, and they got nothing for us. It says much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, doctors, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. And we underline doomed because doomed is just a fancy way to say hopeless. And that's what I need to do. I need to come to that place of hopelessness. I need to see the hopelessness of my predicament as it is if I have this illness. And just like the book meets me where I'm at, the book is also going to hammer home that hopelessness. Hopeless. And then I love that you got doomed. I can't see everything in the chat. I just see the first line. So it's like doomed. Yeah, I do need to get out more. I don't get out much. This is me out of the house. I'm at somebody else's house. I know whose house I'm in. It's family. I'm at a family house. Only family will put up with me, and barely. Thanks for coming, guys. Doomed. So that is hopeless. And then what we're going to see is the hope. We see hopeless, then hope. So doomed, bottom of page XXX, and the hope is on the top of page XXI. What is the solution? And I want to point something out. It is the solution. And I really, really want to emphasize here in Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Drug Addicts Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Codependents Anonymous, we have a solution, but I want to emphasize it is a solution. A solution, which my sponsor points out that is good news, because if we have as many solutions as there are, alcoholics, I don't know if they all work. You know what I mean? I haven't tested yours. I don't have the time to test yours. We have not run that through quality assurance. That's not good. I don't know if it works, but we have one solution. What is the solution? And one solution, that's good news. Might not be jazzed. Listen, let's be real with you. I was not jazzed when I got here. I was not jazzercised. I was not having a great day. My brain just thought about Tybo. Do you guys remember Tybo in the 90s? I was not Tybo to be here. It'll be more normal. Actually, no, I will not make promises I cannot keep. I was going to say it'll be more normal next week. That's a lie. All right. But we got this one solution. And the good news about this one solution is that it is tested. It is verifiable. It works. It works reliably. In fact, in my experience, it works so well that I have not seen, and I really mean this, I have not seen anyone who has worked these 12 steps quickly and thoroughly. And it was continued to live this way of life. These 12 steps is a way of life relapse. I've never seen it. I'm not saying it could not happen, but I've never seen it. It works. There is a solution. And actually, whenever I talk about there is a solution, this is always something I want to emphasize. There, if you are new, if you're struggling, if you're just counting days, what I want you to know is there is a solution. We have, if you are in and out, if you would describe yourself as a chronic relapser, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, what I want you to know is there is a solution. We have a solution. Now, if you're somebody that's been sober a while, and your knuckles are getting a little white, I've been sober, I'm happy to be here. And maybe, and man, like, I'm kind of joking about being dry, but like, man, you might have problems, and real problems, genuine problems that are piling up. And it's like, man, Paige, you don't understand. Your spiritual awakening could not possibly help. What I want you to know is there is a solution. We have a solution, and it works. If you're writing in your book, and I hear it's what all the cool kids do, you can make a little note that our solution is the spiritual awakening. And he says, perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. And because this doctor is almost as all over the place as I am, he's like, oh, I'll relate two. He says one, but he's going to give us two examples. Now, this is our first guy. His name is Hank Parkhurst, and he wrote the chapter, Two Employers. It's the only chapter not written by, in the numbered pages, not written by Bill Wilson. Two Employers. His story was also in the first edition of the book, and it was called The Unbelievers. And we're gonna see this pattern happen in Hank's story. So it says, about 1 year prior to this experience, a man, it's our guy Hank Parkhurst, my homie Hank, he's about as all over the place as I am, was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. So he was being treated for his alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage. The gastric hemorrhage is internal bleeding, like internal stomach bleeding. And when it says but partially recovered, what that means is that he was having internal bleeding, sought treatment for his internal bleeding, and then drank again and began to bleed again. Does that sound familiar? Anyone get treatment and kind of mess up your treatment because you kept drinking? And it seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. His story is called, it's in the first edition, so it's not in this edition of the book. It's The Unbeliever. And don't you worry, Rob's got you. He'll put it in the chat, no pressure. Good job, Rob. That is the highest seal of approval. So he had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage. So he drank on his internal bleeding, and it ruptured again, and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. It seemed like he was losing his mind. He was losing his mind. And to deteriorate is a downhill, right? And it says he had lost everything worthwhile in life. Have I felt like that? Have I felt like I've lost everything worthwhile? And was only living, one might say, to drink. Now, next line is important. He frankly admitted and believed for him there was no hope. So he came to this place of hopelessness. And we can make a note of that. And that's what I've got to do. I've got to come to a place where I come to the end of myself. He admits for himself there is no hope. And we're going to see this as a pattern. And it says, following the elimination of alcohol, what that means is he was detoxed. So he comes to a place of hopelessness. He is detoxed. There was found to be no permanent brain injury, which is good news. That's positive prognosis for Hank. Great news. Some of you are like, did you get that prognosis? Absolutely not. It's damaged already. He had lost everything worthwhile and was living only, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. So you can underline that and make a little note, the 12 steps. He took the actions that later became the 12 steps. This is the pattern. I come to that place of hopelessness, and I take the actions of the 12 steps. And now what we're going to see is what I like to call Dr. Silkworth's Sneaky description of a spiritual awakening. So this is what, if you're like, what the heck does a spiritual awakening look like? What's a spiritual experience? What does it look like? This is what it looks like on the outside. The doctor having a look at Hank, and this is what his spiritual experience looks like. So this is what I'm after. So it says 1 year later. Now I want to point something out. It did not take Hank a year to work the steps. Absolutely. Or take the actions that later became the steps. Absolutely not. It did not take him that long. No. So like it's just he saw Dr. Silkworth a year later. And I want to point out that is the longest length of time that is referenced in this book, a whole year. You know what I mean? So we're going to see that it does not take long to get well. So 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name. So Dr. Silkworth sees Hank before him, and he's like, okay, I get that's Hank. Hank made the appointment, and partially recognized his features. He could kind of see, okay, I kind of know who this guy is, but they're all resemblance ended. The man who was standing before him was not the same man that had his gastric hemorrhage, that internal bleeding. It felt like he was losing his mind. So what did it look like? It says, from a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over. To be brimming over is to be overflowing. And this is what it looks like on the outside. Brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I promise you it is not self-reliance. It is a reliance upon a power greater than ourselves, but that's what it looks like. Overflowing with what appears to be self-reliance, with contentment, this pervasive happiness. And it says, I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. Like he is almost a completely different person. And it says, to me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. So what we see, the pattern that we see is hopeless. We take the actions of the steps, and from there is this transformation, and this powerful transformation that leads to sobriety. You know what I mean? Long time passed, no return to alcohol. So that doesn't have to be your homie. He's my homie Hank. I love Hank. And so Howard was probably like, why? Because he's a little like me, a little all over the place. You know what I'm saying? Woo! All right. So now what we get is my other homie. And listen, this other homie, his name is Fitzmayo. Fitzmayo. Yeah. John Henry Fitzmayo. Howard's homie too. He can be a homie to you if you want to have weird relationships with long past co-founders. So this is Fitzmayo, and his story is in the 4th edition of this book. And it's called Our Southern Friend. And so we don't have time. In fact, I am surprised at how poorly I'm doing at the time. But we will not today. At some point, we're going to pop over to Fitzmayo's story, Our Southern Friend, and we're going to have a look at it. So it says, when I need a mental uplift. So when Dr. Silkworth, man, when he's having a tough day, when he needs a bit of encouragement and support, he thinks of our guy Fitz, our homie Fitz. I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. Now we're going to see something. The patient had... I love how it's got the middle names rocking. They're very historically accurate. So the patient had made his own diagnosis. This is important. This is the diagnosis that I need to make. Deciding his situation hopeless. So again, he came to a place of hopelessness. Hopelessness. That's where I got to get. To be able to see the reality of my condition, and the reality of my condition, if I have alcoholism, is hopelessness. And it says, had hidden in a desert barn, determined to die. And the reason I love Fitzmayo so much is when I got here, he was the first guy that I related to. You know what I mean? this was the first guy that I could see myself in. And it's kind of cool that like I had a cool being able to relate to Fitzmayo, but we're gonna see Fitzmayo have another experience that I have an experience that parallels too. Fitzy is my homie. But and I was talking, I did the math for the temperature. So I'm going to tell the story, hopefully quickly. The reason I relate to Fitzmayo so much is I had a similar experience. I was homeless living on the streets of Calgary. That doesn't make me an alcoholic, but that does make my life unmanageable and me probably a terrible roommate. So just keep that in perspective. And I was homeless living on the streets of Calgary. And I had been doing what I was doing for a little while. And I remember one night I walked. It was throughout the night. I walked from the Calgary Drop-In Center, which is a homeless shelter in downtown Calgary, and I walked all the way up by the airport, which is on the outskirts of the city, up in the like far. It's an airport, so it's not right in the middle. And I walked all night, and I slept. It wasn't right behind a dumpster, but it was dumpster adjacent because I'm a lady. And it was one of those things where my body had just given up. And I slept all day. I didn't have any food. I didn't have any water. I slept all day. I slept all night. I slept all day. I slept all night. And it would have been on the third night. And it was around probably this time of year, where we were about, and I didn't look up these numbers in Fahrenheit, and none of the very few Canadians are going to be here today. So, but it was hovering. Oh, we'll say, why don't we say around the 30s? I don't know. I'm trying to do Fahrenheit math, and I just don't have it. But it was, above freezing in Calgary, Celsius. So, there was frost on the ground, but it wasn't like crazy. Cool. 32 is freezing. So it's probably a little above 32. Thank you. That is a number that I should know. And I don't. And on that third night, for those who use Celsius, which is, I was going to make the joke, which is the proper temperature measurement. It's not. We have no opinion on measuring temperature. The temperature went from maybe 5 degrees, 7 degrees, mid 30s, to minus 30, 35 degrees Celsius with the wind chill, which is minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. And I say that only because I looked it up right before the meeting because I was reminded to do that. And so it was unbelievable. It was so cold that I had to take my shoes off to hold my feet in my hands. And like, I remember what that's like, and having that Fitzmayo moment where, and like, to be honest with you, I should not have, now to be fair, I don't use my toes that often, but I should not have my fingers and toes. I am not somebody who should have survived that. Like, that is not a cool temperature change. That is how things happen in Calgary. But I had that deserted barn determined to die moment. But I will point out, I did notice that I didn't get a searching party. We can't all be as love, Fitzmayo. Oh, I'm kidding. Well, I'm here. It's all good. I didn't need one. So he was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me, following his physical rehabilitation. Now, if you're wanting to read more about Fitz's deserted barn determined to die, that happens on page 13. I've got 2 minutes at most, so we're not going to go there, but you can make a little note in your book to see page 213. And so he was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me, following his physical rehabilitation. So he was physically detoxed. We saw that with Hank. We see that with Fitz, physically detox. He had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought treatment a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have, and I want to point, this is in quotes, the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. As an alcoholic, my willpower does nothing against that first drink. It does nothing to stop me from taking that first drink. Now, I will say it does take some willpower to take these actions, to work the steps. That's where my willpower gets aligned. So, but in the future, you would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. Now, if you're somebody that is here today and you're like, Paige, you don't understand. My alcoholic problem, it's so complicated. My depression's so great. Man, you don't understand. I'm so much worse than you. That's why I love Fitz. So his alcoholic problem was so complex. His depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology. And to make it really clear, at that time, the moral psychology is the actions that later became our 12 steps to produce a spiritual awakening. just to make it really clear. And by the way, and it says, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. We doubted if that would even help. So if you're somebody that's like, Paige, you don't understand, I don't think the steps could help me. Dr. Silkworth didn't think the steps could help Fitz. Now, to be fair, they weren't the steps as outlined how we have them now, but oh, the inventor of Celsius was from Sweden. That's just a fun fact for everyone. Yeah, thank you, Ludi. Come for the hopeless dilemma. Stay for the tangents and the fun facts. And some of you are like, I'm leaving, log off. Let's just wrap this up. All right. So it says, however, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. To become sold on the ideas contained in this book, what that means is he works the 12 steps or takes the actions that later became the 12 steps. That's what it means. So he get to that place of hopelessness. Then he takes the actions of the steps. And this is what it looks like to be somebody that has a spiritual awakening. Another sneaky description of the spiritual awakening. It says he has not had a drink for a great many years. So some sobriety, some permanent contented sobriety. And he is as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. And some of you are like, I do not want to be a fine specimen of manhood. What we mean is as fine a specimen of humanity as one could wish to meet. And that's the ideal. And that's what a spiritual awakening looks like, the best possible version of myself. Now, keep in mind throughout this statement, he's trying to avoid saying the word God, higher power. You know what I mean? And he's just going to hammer it home at the end. It says, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. We're doing it. A little slower than some of would expect. We earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through. And though perhaps he came to scoff, he's like, this doesn't apply to me, he may remain to pray. William D. Silkworth, MD. And so we'll leave it there because I'm a minute or two after and it's getting restless in the kitchen. So we'll stop the recording and we'll wrap it up with the prayer.